In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Motivation. Motivation is a really interesting thing. And we are often blind to what it is that motivates us. We are able to tell ourselves all sorts of stories about why we do or don't say or do something. Yesterday, Margaret and I went to the dog show down in Canfield with Alice. She was not being shown, but we were meeting someone down there, and so we were watching people with the dogs in the ring, and they have little bits of liver or chicken or something like that, and they use that to motivate the dog, to lure the dog into a certain position so the judge gets a really good look at the dog. What I've noticed over time, and in working with Alice as we've worked with our trainer, is probably 50 to 60% of the dog's response has to do with how high a value treat or reward are you offering. Alice will do anything for chicken. Cheese, well, yeah, okay, I'm hungry, I'll have some of that. But boy, offer her chicken and watch your fingers. I would say 50% or more than 50% has to do with the relationship between the dog and the owner, or between the dog and the person who's handling the dog in the show ring. And that motivation of pleasing the human being and getting a response of pleasure and love from the dog's human being goes much further in the ring. I've seen people show dogs where the dog does everything and would do everything beautifully, whether there was a human handler in the ring or not. So motivation is easier to see in dogs, harder to see, I think, in the human heart. David has profoundly hurt God and disappointed God and angered God. In the story that we have this morning, David started out as the youngest son, not highly valued certainly by his brothers, sent out to be with the shepherds to keep track of the sheep. And as Nathan, speaking on God's behalf, reminds him, God took him from the sheepfold, from following the sheep, and made him king. Gave him his master, his former master, King Saul's house and his wives, gave him the whole kingdom, would have given him more than that if David had asked. But somewhere in that, David's motivation turned from being a good king, serving the people, caring for the people that had been given into his care by God. And his motivation became much more self-interested. And as a result of that, he had Uriah the Hittite murdered so that he could take Uriah's wife, with whom he had already lain, had already raped her essentially, and knew that wouldn't go over well publicly, and so was keeping the whole thing secret, trying to keep the whole thing under wraps. She's pregnant and there's no way it's her husband's child. I know what I'll do. I'm the king, I can arrange this. I'll just make sure Uriah gets killed in battle, and then I'll take pity on Uriah's widow and bring her into the palace as my wife. And it is that lying to self that happens within David, that inability to see clearly his motivations for what they are, that puts David right in the middle of this conversation with the prophet Nathan this morning, who I can only imagine the courage it took for Nathan to go to the king Very, very bad. God is not happy with you, and there are consequences for you and for your descendants. When we get to the gospel passage this morning, the feeding of the 5,000, which we heard last week, and now the people want more. But they don't want more of Jesus. They want more of the goodies. They want more of what Jesus has to give them in a kind of physical, self-serving way. And so they get into boats and they go to the other side of the lake, and then they tell an interesting lie to themselves as they say to Jesus, "Oh, Rabbi, when did you come here?" They knew where he was. They were pursuing him because they wanted more bread, which was exactly what Jesus says to them. You didn't come looking for me. You came because you wanted more to eat. I can give you more to eat. I can give you more than you can ask for or imagine. But it's my kind of food, not the food that you're seeking. And there's this whole conversation that really is about motivation. Why were they following Jesus? Why were they looking for Jesus? Why were they putting effort into finding him? So David, the people rowing across the lake or sailing across the lake, the dogs trotting around the ring in the sun yesterday, and we all have within us movements of the heart that motivate us to take or not take certain actions. And it's worth being willing to look honestly within ourselves and to ask that question, why do we seek Jesus? Why do we want to find him? Why do we want to spend time with him? Why do we want to be in relationship with him? And it's manifested by the fact that we're here this morning, gathered together to worship. It's manifested through a variety of our actions, working on Bargain Box, volunteering at the food pantry. But deep underneath the outward actions, what is it that motivates us and moves us to make those decisions, to claim Christ as the one whom we call Lord, and to shape our life in a way that makes a choice to follow him day by day? What's deep within us that's calling us to those actions and those decisions? Is it a love to know God, a longing to feel God's presence, to know God's truth in our lives, to allow ourselves to be shaped and formed, and as Paul says in the letter of the Ephesians, to allow God's Holy Spirit within us to change us? You know, nobody likes change, and yet we are called to allow ourselves to be changed by God, to grow up into the fullness, to grow up into maturity, to grow up into all that is possible for us as individuals with the Holy Spirit living within us, that we might reflect the God whom we follow and the God whom we worship. It's hard to really identify what motivates us. But it's a question worth asking more than once. It is time well spent to reflect on what is it within us that moves us and draws us, not only here on Sunday morning, but draws us into the heart of God every day. Amen.